Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, not a storm of rain or thunder, but a storm of emotions. Anxiety sharpens its claws, anger burns through your chest, and fear whispers that you are powerless. In these moments, most people are taught to fight louder, react faster, or drown in the chaos. But what if true strength does not come from reacting, but from silence? Medusa, the figure so often painted as a monster, teaches us something different. She does not run, she does not beg, and she does not seek approval. Her silence is not weakness, it is defiance. It is the refusal to let external noise dictate her internal state. To face her gaze is to confront the truth. Those who lose control become statues of their own impulses. In psychology, silence is not an absence, it is a tool. It creates space between trigger and response, between emotion and action. Stoic philosophy calls this space prohairesis, the power to govern one's own choices, no matter how violent the world becomes. Medusa embodies this principle. She does not conquer through force, but through unshakable presence. Navigating pressure, judgment, and emotional storms, Medusa's silence becomes a radical act of resistance. It means refusing to be reduced to society's labels, to remain centered when chaos provokes you, and to transform vulnerability into inner armor. Silence, then, becomes the highest form of self-mastery where dignity is louder than any scream. This is not about becoming stone, it is about becoming unbreakable. To be like Medusa is to understand that storms will always come, but they do not have to destroy you. Instead, they can carve you into someone stronger, clearer, and untouchable. The question is, will you let emotions rule you, or will you rule them? Welcome to this space of reflection, strength, and transformation. If you are here, it is because you know how heavy emotional storms can feel moments of anxiety, pressure, and judgment that threaten to break you from within. But you are also here because you sense there is another way, a way to turn this chaos into clarity. That path begins with Medusa's silence, and what it can teach us about mastering our inner world. This work is more than theory. It is a guide to living with greater control, dignity, and authenticity. Drawing on psychology and Stoic philosophy, we will explore how Medusa's myth can be reimagined as a powerful archetype for women today. She is not just a figure of fear, but of defiance, resilience, and emotional command. Through her silence, she shows us that strength is not always in reacting. It is in choosing not to. If this resonates with you, I invite you to stay with me throughout this journey. Each chapter will unfold practical strategies, reflections, and exercises to help you transform emotional storms into inner strength. You will discover how silence, boundaries, and self-mastery can become daily practices, not as acts of repression, but as acts of liberation. Before we go deeper, I ask you to take one action. Subscribe, like this content, and leave a comment telling us your country and city. Sharing your place in the world not only builds connection, but also reminds us that this journey towards strength is global. Women everywhere face storms, and together we can learn to face them with power and clarity. Your silence can be your shield. Your stillness can be your weapon. Your gaze unmoved, unbroken, can be your greatest act of resistance. Let us step into Medusa's silence together. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forces in human psychology. Too often, it is confused with passivity, repression, or even weakness. Yet when studied carefully, silence emerges as a powerful mechanism of emotional regulation and psychological strength. For the Stoics, silence was not about withholding expression, but about mastering response. Epictetus reminds us, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. In this simple statement lies the seed of transformation. To respond with silence when provoked, judged, or misunderstood is not to surrender, it is to claim sovereignty over your mind. Medusa, long demonized as a symbol of rage and monstrosity, can instead be read as a radical metaphor for this sovereignty. She does not argue or plead. Her silence itself becomes judgment on those who confront her without self-control. From a psychological perspective, silence functions as an interruption to the cycle of reactivity. Neuroscience shows us that when we are emotionally triggered, the amygdala floods the nervous system with stress responses, pushing us toward impulsive action. By choosing silence, even for a brief moment, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, has time to intervene. This pause is not neutral, it is strategic. It allows us to shift from instinct to intention. Medusa's myth, when reframed, demonstrates this pause. She is still, steady, unyielding. Those who rush at her with aggression or arrogance are destroyed, not because she strikes, but because they fail to master themselves. The silence of her presence magnifies their own lack of control. In the lives of women today, emotional storms are constant. Criticism at work, societal expectations about beauty, relationships loaded with power dynamics, and the internal voice of self-doubt. Each of these storms tempts a reaction defensiveness. Over-explaining, collapsing under pressure, silence in this context becomes more than a coping strategy.
Like that.
It is an act of self-respect. Imagine being accused unjustly in a meeting. The instinct may be to argue, to defend every point, to demand recognition, yet a moment of silence, breathing, pausing, holding eye contact, often shifts the balance of power. The silence declares, "I will not be dragged into a storm that is not mine to fight." This is Medusa's gift to contemporary psychology, to transform silence into a shield that preserves dignity. The Stoics spoke of ataraxia, a state of unshaken calm in the face of turmoil. For women navigating modern pressures, this calm can feel impossible. But silence is the entry point. Consider Marcus Aurelius, who wrote in his Meditations, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Medusa embodies this truth. She cannot control the gaze of others, just as we cannot control gossip, social judgment, or cultural biases, but she controls her own presence. She teaches us that strength lies not in silencing the world, but in silencing the storm inside. Practical application begins with daily rituals. One exercise is the silent pause practice. When you feel triggered, commit to 3 breaths before responding. During those breaths, observe the sensations in your body: tight chest, racing thoughts, flushed skin. Name them silently: anger, fear, shame. This labeling process, shown in psychological research, reduces the intensity of emotion by bringing it into conscious awareness. Then, choose whether a response is needed at all. Many battles vanish when silence is chosen. Others are faced with clarity instead of frenzy. By practicing silence intentionally, you rewire your relationship to emotional storms, turning them into opportunities for mastery. Medusa's silence also reminds us of the importance of boundaries. Silence is not simply the absence of speech. It is the refusal to engage in dynamics that drain dignity. In abusive relationships, for instance, silence can signal the withdrawal of permission for manipulation. Rather than arguing endlessly with someone who twists words, silence ends the cycle. Think in professional spaces, silence after being interrupted can force others to recognize the disrespect without you having to spell it out. Boundaries are set not only by words, but also by the power of withdrawal. Medusa's myth shows this withdrawal vividly. She does not chase. She does not explain. She simply is. And that presence alone demands respect. Yet silence must not be confused with suppression. Suppression denies emotion. Silence acknowledges emotion without letting it rule. In therapy, women often fear that silence will mean invisibility, that not reacting equals erasure.
Activity.
But authentic silence is active. It is a choice. It requires inner dialogue, awareness, and courage. To sit in silence with one's own pain is perhaps the most radical act of self-compassion. Medusa's silence, then, becomes an archetype not of isolation, but of integration. The snakes in her hair, symbols of fear and chaos, are not hidden, they are carried openly. She does not silence her truth. She silences her reaction to those who cannot handle it. Consider the modern epidemic of anxiety. Women report higher rates of anxiety disorders globally, often linked to societal pressure, multitasking, and emotional labor. Traditional advice leans toward coping mechanisms: distraction, venting, talking it out. While expression has its place, silence offers a counterbalance. In silence, anxiety is neither fueled nor denied. It is observed. The Stoic exercise of view from above can be combined with silence. Step back mentally, imagine the event. From a bird's-eye view, see how small today's crisis appears in the larger scheme of life. Medusa's unblinking stillness mirrors this perspective. She looks directly at reality without flinching, and by doing so, reduces its power. To embody Medusa's silence is to resist emotional colonization the way others attempt to control your mood, provoke reactions, or define your identity. It is to declare, my inner state belongs to me alone. In a culture that rewards constant availability, immediate responses, and emotional performance, choosing silence is rebellion. It is a refusal to be consumed, it says. I will respond when I decide, not when I am commanded. This resistance is not coldness, it is autonomy. It allows for authentic connection rather than coerced reaction. Ultimately, the transformation lies in reinterpreting storms as teachers rather than enemies. Silence turns storms into mirrors, showing us where we are still reactive, where we still seek validation, where we still fear rejection. Each storm becomes a training ground. Medusa is not the end of the story. She is the threshold. Through her silence, she invites women to step into a new kind of power, not violent, but unshakable. In this silence, storms no longer destroy, they refine. And in being refined, you become a force that no storm can command. To understand the power of silence, we must first dismantle the cultural narrative that equates a woman's value with her ability to explain, justify, and soothe others. Society often demands that women defend themselves, soften their tone, or provide endless context for their choices. In this expectation, silence is framed as suspicious or hostile, while compliance is celebrated as grace.
Yet psychology
And philosophy reveal the opposite. Silence, when chosen consciously, communicates a depth of self-respect that no explanation can match. Medusa, the archetype of untamed silence, embodies this defiance. She refuses to negotiate her existence or dilute her presence to ease others. By reclaiming silence, women can begin to disentangle themselves from the exhausting trap of over-explaining and step into the strength of unspoken conviction. From the perspective of Stoicism, silence represents control over one's tongue. Most dangerous and powerful instrument of the human being, Seneca wrote, it is better to conquer our grief than to deceive it. Words, in moments of emotional intensity, often deceive. They mask fear, exaggerate anger, or surrender dignity in the hope of being heard. Silence prevents such deception, compels a woman to sit with her emotions until they clarify, instead of scattering them impulsively into words. In modern psychological terms, silence functions like cognitive restructuring by not reacting instantly. The mind gains the opportunity to reinterpret the situation. Thus, silence is not suppression, but suspensional, conscious holding of space until clarity emerges. Medusa's myth, though distorted through patriarchal retellings, can be reimagined as a story of boundaries. She was violated, cursed, and demonized, yet her final form radiates impenetrability. To meet her eyes is to face the consequence of crossing her boundary. In her silence, she sets the most absolute of limits. Those who transgress are undone, not by her violence, but by their own lack of restraint. For women navigating relationships, romantic, professional, or familial, this myth is instructive. Boundaries do not always require confrontation. Sometimes they require the power of disengagement. Silence communicates. I will not allow you to feed on my energy. I owe you no performance of pain. In daily practice, women can translate Medusa's silence into actionable rituals. One example is the withheld response method when receiving a message designed to provoke or manipulate. Do not reply immediately. Give yourself hours or even days to decide whether the message deserves your energy at all. Research in emotional regulation confirms that delayed, Responses reduce impulsivity and increase alignment with long-term values. Another practice is the silent walk, moving through your environment without headphones, without speaking, simply observing. Such intentional silence reconnects you with your inner compass, reminding you that not every moment requires commentary. These small acts train the mind to resist compulsion and cultivate autonomy. But silence is not merely protective, it is transformative. In group dynamics, the silent woman is often misread as powerless, yet in reality, silence can dominate. A room pause after being interrupted can weigh heavier than any retort. Steady gaze, unaccompanied by defensive words, exposes the insecurity of the aggressor. In therapeutic settings, silence is equally powerful. Research shows that patients who sit with unspoken emotions often reach breakthroughs faster than those who rush to verbalize everything. For women conditioned to constantly prove themselves, learning to wield silence is like learning a new language of power, subtle, potent, undeniable. Still, silence must be paired with self-awareness to avoid turning into withdrawal or self-erasure. There is a danger in confusing chosen silence with silenced existence. Many women have been forced into silence historically, their voices suppressed by fear, violence, or systemic oppression. The silence of Medusa is different. It is not imposed, but chosen. The challenge for women today is to discern the difference. Am I silent because I fear speaking, or because I am strong enough not to need to? Psychology offers a framework here. Chosen silence increases self-efficacy and confidence. While imposed silence correlates with shame and repression, the work is to transform silence from something endured into something commanded. In this way, silence becomes a mirror of identity. To practice silence is to face yourself without distraction. This can be terrifying, for silence strips away noise, excuses, and external validation. It forces a confrontation with inner fears. What if I am not enough without explanation? What if my stillness makes me invisible? Yet it is precisely in that confrontation that transformation occurs. Medusa's silence is not empty, it is full. Her stillness radiates presence, declaring, I exist whether you approve or not. Women who embrace this truth step into a radical authenticity that requires no translation.
How?
Consider the workplace as a battlefield of modern storms. A woman may be pressured to answer emails instantly, to respond in meetings with rehearsed politeness, to justify every decision to colleagues who question her authority. To answer every provocation is to scatter energy like arrows wasted on the wind. But to remain silent, deliberate, and measured is to conserve strength for meaningful action. Silence here becomes strategy, not absence. It demonstrates that worth does not depend on constant defense. In fact, studies on leadership reveal that the most respected leaders often speak less, but with greater weight. Medusa, in her mythic silence, mirrors this principle. Power does not require noise, it requires presence. At the personal level, silence creates space for intimacy with oneself. In a culture addicted to distraction, silence feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is the threshold of growth. To sit silently with your own emotions, without numbing them or explaining them away, is to reclaim sovereignty over your mind. This practice aligns with the Stoic exercise of prosocia, continuous attention to the self. Through silence, women can identify what truly belongs to them and what has been imposed by others. Medusa's silence teaches that the inner world, once mastered, cannot be conquered from outside. Ultimately, Chapter 2 deepens the paradox. Silence is not weakness, but strength. Not absence, but presence. Not repression, but transformation. In reclaiming silence, women reclaim themselves. Like Medusa, they discover that they do not need to shout to be powerful, nor explain to be valid. They need only to stand firm in their own being, unshaken by the storms around them. This silence is not an escape from life, but a new way of engaging with it with clarity, with boundaries, and with unbreakable dignity. Anger is one of the most feared emotions for women, both internally and externally. Society often punishes women who express anger, branding them as irrational, aggressive, or too much. As a result, many learn to repress it, only for it to resurface as anxiety, resentment, or self-doubt. Yet anger is not inherently destructive. Psychologists describe it as a signal and alarm that boundaries have been crossed, that something deeply important has been threatened. The challenge is not to eliminate anger, but to master it. This is where Medusa's silence offers an alternative path. Anger does not need to explode outward to be valid. It can be acknowledged, transformed, and contained with dignity, becoming fuel for clarity instead of chaos. Stoic philosophy offers a framework for this mastery. Seneca's On Anger describes rage as a form of temporary madness that blinds reason. The Stoics did not deny the existence of anger, but they taught that indulging it was surrendering control. For women, who often face unique provocations, condescension, dismissal, unjust criticism, the temptation to respond with fury is natural. Yet Stoicism insists that the power lies not in the provocation, but in the response. Silence becomes a tool of sovereignty here. To hold silence when anger rises is to create distance between stimulus and reaction. It is to declare, I am not ruled by the offense. I decide the meaning of this moment. Medusa embodies this principle in her mythic presence. Her silence in the face of confrontation transforms the aggressor, not herself. Those who lunge at her with arrogance or violence are undone by their own lack of control. They become stone not because she shouts them down, but because her unshaken stillness reveals their fragility. In the psychological landscape of modern women, this is profoundly empowering. To refuse to be provoked is to expose the insecurity of those who seek to destabilize you. Silence, then, is not weakness, but a mirror held up to the aggressor's own disorder. In daily life, the storms of anger may arise in moments as small as being interrupted or as large as betrayal in relationships. The instinctive reaction is often to retaliate verbally, to restore justice through confrontation. Yet silence can achieve something more lasting. It preserves your inner dignity, while allowing anger to clarify rather than consume. One practical exercise is called anger observation. When provoked, instead of immediately reacting, pause and silently observe, what value of mine was violated? Why does this matter so much? By silently naming the root of anger, you shift from raw emotion to insight. The silence is not suppression, but reflection, turning fire into fuel for wisdom. Psychology confirms the value of this practice. Research on emotional regulation shows that response delay significantly decreases the intensity of anger episodes. By waiting even 90 seconds before responding, the body's stress response begins to decline, allowing reason to return. Silence provides that delay. It interrupts the loop of escalation, offering a path back to rational choice. In this way, silence is not the opposite of expression, but its refinement. It ensures that when words are finally spoken, they come from clarity, not chaos. Of course, the risk with silence is misinterpretation. Some will mistake your silence for compliance, others for defeat. Yet Medusa's archetype reminds us that silence is not for them, it is for you. It is not about convincing others of your power, but about retaining it within yourself. Those who misunderstand your silence often reveal their own lack of perception. And in time, your consistent calmness becomes its own statement. Unbothered, untouchable, anchored in self-mastery. Silence, wielded consistently, teaches others how to treat you without you having to lecture them. Silence also helps dismantle the cycle of performative apology that many women fall into. Conditioned to smooth tensions, women often rush to say sorry, even when anger is justified. By remaining silent instead, you resist the pressure to erase your own feelings for the comfort of others. This does not mean ignoring necessary conversations. It means choosing when and how they occur. Medusa does not rush to placate or justify. She allows her presence to speak first. Women can adopt this principle in relationships, waiting until emotions settle before addressing issues, ensuring that words are precise and anchored rather than reactive and regretful. In professional environments, this principle is equally transformative. A woman confronted by unfair criticism may be tempted to defend herself with urgency, fearing silence will be seen as weakness. Yet silence can shift the dynamic entirely. By listening without rushing to respond, she communicates authority and self-assurance. Research on leadership confirms that those who can tolerate silence in tense situations are perceived as more confident and powerful. Medusa's silence becomes a strategic tool here. It communicates, without words, that you will not be cornered into impulsive reactions. You command the timing, and therefore the narrative. At its deepest level, silence transforms anger into inner strength by revealing that no one can truly make you angry without your consent. The Stoics insisted that emotions arise not from external events, but from judgments about them. To remain silent is to reclaim this truth. Your actions may be unjust, but my interpretation belongs to me. Medusa, misunderstood as a monster, becomes instead a guardian of this autonomy. Her silence demonstrates that power is not about dominating others, but about refusing to be dominated by one's own impulses. For women today, this lesson is liberating. The ultimate strength of Medusa's silence is that it transforms storms of anger into anchors of clarity. Rather than being consumed by fire, silence channels that fire into presence, conviction, and boundary. It says, I am not afraid of my anger, but I am not enslaved to it either. This balance between acknowledgement and mastery is the heart of emotional sovereignty. In learning to hold silence amidst storms, women learn to carry anger as information, not as identity. They transform what once threatened to overwhelm them into a source of direction, resilience, and unshakable strength. Silence is not only a strategy for emotional storms, it is also the foundation of boundaries. Boundaries are among the most critical elements of psychological well-being, yet they are often misunderstood or dismissed, especially for women. Many are raised to equate kindness with self-sacrifice, to believe that saying no is selfish, and that setting limits makes them unlovable. This conditioning leads to exhaustion, resentment, and a life lived more for others than for oneself. Medusa's silence interrupts this pattern. Her myth, she becomes untouchable, her very presence enforcing an invisible line that cannot be crossed. She does not argue for her right to space. She simply embodies it. For women today, her archetype offers a powerful lesson. Boundaries do not always require justification, they require conviction. From the Stoic perspective, boundaries align with the principle of self-command. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Boundaries are the practical expression of this truth. They are not about controlling others, but about defining where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. Silence becomes essential here because boundaries lose power when over-explained. The more you justify why you need rest, time, or distance, the more room you leave for negotiation. Silence communicates finality. A clear no, followed by silence, often says more than paragraphs of explanation. Medusa's silence is therefore the most radical form of boundary, unshaken, unapologetic, absolute. Psychology reinforces this point. Research on assertiveness shows that excessive justification weakens the perceived legitimacy of boundaries. When women explain too much, others interpret the boundary as negotiable. Silence, however, strengthens the boundary by signaling certainty. This is why therapists often teach clients to practice minimal response, saying only what is necessary, then holding silence. For example, I won't be available tonight, followed by silence, communicates confidence. Adding layers of justification because I'm tired, because I have too much work, because I don't want to disappoint, opens the door to challenge. Silence closes it. Medusa's myth echoes this psychological principle. Her silence is her shield, her refusal to over-explain is her power. The challenge for many women is tolerating the discomfort of silence after a boundary is set. We are conditioned to fill the space, to soften the tension, to reassure the other person. Boundaries are not meant to please. They are meant to protect. Learning to sit with silence after saying no is therefore an act of courage. It is allowing the discomfort of someone else's reaction without making it your responsibility. Medusa teaches this unflinching stillness. She does not flinch at the discomfort of others. Her silence says, "Your reaction is yours. My boundary is mine." This separation is at the heart of psychological freedom. In practical terms, women can cultivate boundary silence through daily exercises. One such practice is the pause after no. Choose one situation where you tend to over-explain and instead offer a simple refusal followed by intentional silence. Notice the anxiety that arises, the urge to justify, the discomfort of the pause. Breathe into that space. Over time, the silence becomes easier and the boundary becomes stronger. Another practice is journaling in silence. Write your limits clearly. Then sit quietly with them, reinforcing the truth that they are valid regardless of anyone's approval. These small rituals build the muscle of unshaken presence. The workplace provides fertile ground for this discipline. Women are often pressured to say yes to extra tasks, to volunteer, to overextend. Silence after a boundary becomes a revolutionary act. For example, when declining additional work beyond your role, a calm "that's not possible for me right now" followed by silence asserts both clarity and confidence. In leadership research, silence after a boundary is shown to increase perceived authority. Medusa's archetype reminds us why. Silence is not absence, but presence, so complete that it requires no defense. In personal relationships, silence in boundaries prevents entanglement. Many conflicts escalate because one person reacts to every provocation, trying to win through explanation. But silence halts the cycle when a partner, friend, or family member crosses a line repeatedly. Silence after a boundary signals that you will not participate in endless negotiation. This does not mean cutting off communication permanently. It means refusing to be drawn into patterns that erode dignity. Medusa's myth illustrates this vividly. Those who cannot respect boundaries destroy themselves in her gaze. She does not chase them, argue with them, or beg for recognition. Her silence enforces the line. Importantly, silence in boundaries is not about isolation. It does not mean closing yourself off from connection or empathy. Instead, it creates the conditions for healthier relationships. When boundaries are clear, connection becomes authentic rather than manipulative. Silence in this sense becomes fertile ground. It clears the noise so that relationships can be built on respect rather than guilt. Medusa's silence is therefore not a rejection of intimacy, but a filter that ensures only those capable of respect may enter it. For women navigating the complexities of modern relationships, this lesson is transformative. Silence protects your energy so it can be invested where it truly matters. At its core, silence in boundaries affirms the principle of authenticity. To remain silent when pressured to explain is to trust that your truth requires no external validation. This is radical because it resists one of the deepest cultural pressures on women, the demand to justify their choices. Medusa's silence teaches that authenticity needs no justification. Your no is enough. Your stillness is enough. Your presence is enough. This is the essence of dignity. To exist without permission, to draw boundaries without apology, to remain unshaken in silence. Ultimately, silence as a boundary is an act of self-respect that radiates outward. It teaches others how to treat you, it models dignity for those around you, and it transforms the way you see yourself. Medusa's silence becomes not a curse but a blessing. A reminder that true power lies not in constant explanation, but in the unmovable clarity of being. For women seeking freedom from emotional storms, this silence is the anchor that steadies every other part of life. With it, storms cannot drag you under, they only strengthen your resolve. Silence is often misunderstood as passivity, as if withholding words means surrendering power. Yet in truth, silence is a choice, a disciplined act of strength. Medusa's silence is not weakness, but sovereignty. She shows that silence can be sharper than speech, a force that compels others to confront themselves. In many ways, silence is the most eloquent response to chaos because it refuses to participate in the cycle of noise. For women navigating Emotional storms. This perspective transforms silence from a burden into a weapon not to attack, but to defend, to guard one's dignity, and to reframe one's relationship with the world. The Stoics saw silence as a form of inner order. Epictetus advised, "Be silent for the most part, or speak only what is necessary and in few words." This was not a call to repression, but to intentionality. Speak less is to train the mind to distinguish what is essential from what is trivial. In the modern age, where women are pressured to respond instantly, to explain constantly, and to make themselves endlessly available, silence becomes an act of rebellion. Medusa embodies this rebellion. She does not explain her rage, her solitude, or her transformation. She holds her silence, and in doing so, forces others to reckon with themselves. Silence, then, becomes the refusal to let external storms dictate one's interior climate. Psychology supports this interpretation. Cognitive behavioral therapy emphasizes the power of the pause, the ability to insert space between stimulus and response. This pause is, in essence, silence. When anxiety surges or provocation arises, silence provides the window for self-regulation. It interrupts automatic reactions and allows reason to intervene. Women who practice silence in emotional storms report feeling less controlled by others and more grounded in themselves. Instead of reacting to every provocation, they begin to choose responses aligned with their values. Medusa's silence, therefore, reflects a psychological truth. Silence is the first step toward mastery of emotion, yet silence is not meant to be permanent isolation. It is a tool, not a prison. Medusa's myth, though often read as tragedy, can also be read as transformation. Her silence is not about exile from humanity, but about the purification of her presence. By retreating into silence, she regains her autonomy. For women, this means that silence can be used deliberately to restore balance. When life becomes overwhelming, choosing silence, a walk without a phone, an evening without explanation, a day without social obligations, can reset the nervous system. Silence is not emptiness, but renewal. Like Medusa's cavern, it becomes a sacred place where one's power regenerates. In practice, this means cultivating rituals of silence. One powerful exercise is the morning silence. Begin each day with 10 minutes of deliberate quiet, no phone, no conversation, no stimulation. Simply sit and observe the mind. This daily silence becomes an anchor, a reminder that storms can rage outside but calm exists within. Another practice is the strategic silence in conflict. When provoked, instead of responding immediately, commit to silence. Breathe, pause, and respond only when the storm inside has settled. Over time, this trains the nervous system to decouple external chaos from internal peace. Medusa's silence thus evolves from metaphor into method and everyday discipline of psychological resilience. In the realm of relationships, silence becomes especially transformative. Arguments often escalate not because of the issue itself, but because of the reactive exchange of words. Silence disrupts this cycle. A calm, intentional pause communicates strength far more than reactive speech. Partners, friends, and colleagues quickly learn to respect the silence, recognizing it as a boundary. Importantly, silence here does not mean stonewalling or avoidance. It means holding dignity in the midst of provocation. Medusa's gaze petrifies because it mirrors back truth without words. Similarly, silence in relationships reflects reality without embellishment. It says, "This is where I stand. This is what I will not tolerate." In professional settings, silence can elevate authority. Women are often pressured to fill space with words, to prove competence through over-explanation. Yet research shows that those who master silence in meetings, pausing before speaking, refusing to over-justify, allowing silence to linger, are perceived as more confident and capable. Medusa's silence thus becomes a model for leadership. The leader who does not rush, does not beg, does not overcompensate, but instead commands the room through presence. For women striving to rise in male-dominated environments, silence becomes not submission, but power. Silence also creates space for authenticity. Without silence, identity becomes reactive, shaped by constant noise from others. With silence, identity crystallizes. Women who practice silence learn to distinguish their true voice from the expectations imposed upon them. Medusa's silence symbolizes this reclamation of identity. She is no longer defined by Athena's curse or Poseidon's violation and silence. She defines herself. For modern women, this lesson is critical. Silence is the soil in which selfhood grows. Without it, one remains trapped in the storm of others' judgments. With it, one becomes rooted, unmovable, authentic. The final transformation lies in reimagining silence, not as loneliness, but as chosen solitude. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of oneself. Medusa's solitude is chosen, and in it she becomes untouchable. For women, learning to embrace chosen silence moments without validation, without performance, unlocks profound strength. It is in these moments of solitude that resilience deepens, creativity awakens, and self-respect hardens into certainty. Silence, far from being empty, becomes full of clarity, full of autonomy, full of unshakable presence. Thus, Medusa's silence offers its final lesson. Silence is not a void but a fortress. It is not the end of communication, but the beginning of sovereignty. For women facing emotional storms, silence is the practice that transforms chaos into clarity, anxiety into composure, and pressure into power. To remain silent in the storm is not to surrender it, is to rise above it, unshaken, untouchable, sovereign. Like Medusa, every woman can discover that silence is her shield, her boundary, and her crown. Silence is not absence, nor is it surrender. It is the foundation of strength. Throughout this journey, we've explored how Medusa's archetype teaches women to transform emotional storms into resilience, clarity, and unshakable presence. From managing anger to setting boundaries, from reclaiming solitude to mastering emotional response, silence emerges as a radical tool of autonomy. It is in silence that women discover the power to navigate the world without losing themselves, to face judgment without compromise, and to respond with precision rather than impulse. By embracing the lessons of Medusa, women learn that storms are not enemies but mirrors, reflecting where strength must deepen and boundaries must be clarified. Psychology and Stoicism reinforce this truth. Pause, reflection, and presence are not weakness, they are mastery. Silence provides the space to observe, the courage to resist, and the clarity to act when it matters most. It transforms anxiety, provocation, and societal pressure into tools for empowerment rather than sources of defeat. Ultimately, Medusa's silence is a manifesto of self-sovereignty. To be like Medusa is to exist fully, unapologetically, and with intention. Every pause, every withheld reaction, every unshaken gaze builds inner fortitude. Women who claim silence claim themselves. They turn chaos into clarity, pressure into presence, and storms into a path of unwavering power. In the quiet, they become untouchable, sovereign, and profoundly free.